Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 30th of December 2025. Nearly the end of 2025. It's amazing, isn't it? Hello there, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to see you on the stream tonight. Thank you for taking some time out of your Christmas, New Year period and spending it with us. Greatly appreciated. And for those watching in replay, welcome. Should be an interesting conversation with Edwin this evening. As normal, of course, we will take questions as we go through. I've got some questions that people sent me beforehand as well. Before I bring Edwin in, just a little reminder, we're not providing specific financial or property or legal advice. This is a general conversation. We moderate the chat, but feel free to throw questions, comments, suggestions as we go. If you use that Walk the World DFA, you'll be able to get my attention and get your question into the queue. I've enabled Super Chat, which means that you can get your question to the top of the list, or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. I really appreciate those who support us via Super Chat, via PayPal or via Patreon. It really helps to cover the cost of what we do here. We couldn't do it without your help. We do this not for profit, but because we think there's a really, really important conversation to be had. Right, let me bring Edwin in. Edwin, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Martin. The weather's actually magnificent here. I'm not sure how things are faring over there in England, but it's marvellous weather, and just trying to find a bit of time to relax, think, and see what we're going to have for our followers and our viewers next year, as well as doing a bit of preparation for tonight.
Excellent. Well, yes, the weather's been pretty nice here. It's actually not been rainy at all. It's been quite cold, but perfectly fine. And they're forecasting snow next week or something, so we'll see whether that transpires. But, you know, as with all of these things, I don't think the weather forecasters have much idea about what's going on. I hope that we've got a bit more idea of what's going on with regard to property. And I titled this particular show 2026 Property Trends with Edwin and Martin. But for those who've been following, this is the third in a sort of a little bit of a series that I've been running over the last few days. Firstly, I walked through my own Australian price scenarios updated for 2026 a couple of days ago, and that's still available for replay if you want to see that. And yesterday, I went through the mortgage stress data, specifically looking at the housing costs and the broader household costs, and concluded that next year people are going to continue to be crushed by bills because the costs are still rising considerably. So all of those things are there. So that's a little bit of context. And then, of course, we got this wonderful article from Aidan Devine. Aussie house prices will double by 2030 in many areas, modelling shows. This, of course, is news.com.au and also was on REA as well. And the quote here was, "The picture is terrifying for anyone still trying to crack the property market." REA Group economist Angus Moore said prices haven't done climbing. If prices continue to grow at the same rate as in the past 5 years, buyers would pay about 61% more in Sydney, 68% more in Brisbane, and 75% more in Adelaide by 2030. And Melbourne prices could be 70% higher. Perth prices go up 60%, and Hobart and Canberra rise about 40%. Now, of course, nobody's going to think that what happened previously is going to happen again. In fact, Ben Phillips was quite appropriate here. He said, "There is virtually no value in projecting past trends at a suburb level into the future. Prices doubling by 2030 may be a good headline, but it's nothing else." And that's exactly right. There's not a lot. And just to show you that, here's three quick views. This is North Ryde units over 10 years. They peaked in November 2016 and 2017. You can see there that there were 928,000. They went close to 1 million in 2017. They're now at 792,000, and there's not really much evidence of a rise. Thurrool peaked, of course, in 2021, thanks to the COVID and the ultra low interest rates, but have gone pretty much sideways since then. But North Perth 6006 was at 840,000 in November 2016. A decade later, 1.69 million. So my point is, it is very much a question of where you look and how you look, but you can't just project back into the future. And that's the critical point here, isn't it, Edwin? There's a lot of spin out there. There's a lot of people, particularly in the real estate sector, trying to get people to sort of pile back in and try and convince them and panic them into moving. But the truth is that things are much more complicated.
Now, look, I'm going to go by saying that there'll be certain types of properties in certain areas that may double in price over the next 5 years. But as you said, you have to be very specific. Specific at the type of property, the location, and what are the factors that surround those shifts in those areas, and most of it, as we can see from our outlooks throughout the 2025 of what happened in Melbourne, a lot of it's got to do with, in a lot of other places around Australia as well, it's got to do with government policy and the demographics. We talk about how there are groups, there are power groups like your WeChat chatterers, the silent tigers, how they move and change values across many markets of not only Sydney but across Australia, and that's where people have just got to be careful. But when you start painting everything with a single brush and saying everything's going to move, or you make a generic statement like that, well, that is the clickbait, right? So what you and I talk about is more in line with specifics, more in line what we see on the ground at grassroots levels, what you get from your surveys. We understand the pain. We talk, what's going to influence different markets. We've called a lot of the movements and the shifts and the rises and the falls in Melbourne. You and I were calling that before. When the WeChat chatterers were telling us what they were going to do, and then when they acted on the chatter across WeChat, then the mainstream came in, anywhere between 4 and 6 months later, started realising what was happening, but the chatters were already out, and that was the dumping of investment properties, particularly in the subdivision areas in the fringes of the Melbourne region, and hence the reason why we've got almost 3 times as many homes for sale in Melbourne than apartments. In Sydney, we've got and also there's 3 times as many homes for sale in Melbourne than in Sydney. So it's what is going to go up in value. Some of my predictions that we're going to talk about later on are, there are some parts, I believe some parts and types of properties in Sydney being our backyard for myself and our team, will go up, comfortably 20% in value. Again, because of government policy and because of the type of property that we're looking at for some of our clients, and we're looking at for future clients as well. But then there are others, like you said, like you've got your apartment markets. We can buy apartments in your Parramatta LGA for a lot less than what it cost the developers to sell back in 2017. But I dare say, Martin, it all comes back to government policy, right? And most of it is centered around immigration. Is that going to change? Is really the $64 trillion question at the moment. We've gone from 64 million to 64 billion now. We're talking in trillions, because that's how much money the government's printing. So when we look at these things, it's whether or not they're going to taper down on these policies in order to have these shifts that people often talk about over in New Zealand or in Canada or in other places. But from our outlook, myself and my team, my extended team, and from what we get from our legal eagles that we work with in the immigration centres, as well as the lawyers and barristers that work in those departments, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Hence the reason why I'm sticking to the predictions that we're going to talk about tonight, and hence my bullish outlook for 2026 for the Sydney market in particular, because it's all about that type of property and government policy.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? So we both have, I think, a heated agreement on you can't generalise. You can't say Australian house prices will, or even Sydney prices will. You've got to talk about specific locations, specific types of property, specific contexts. And in fact, there was a question that was submitted beforehand by Joey, who said, hey, Edwin, it seems to me that you and Martin actually disagree quite a lot on property trends. And I'm not sure we do. I think we do have some specific slight variances, but I think the three critical points I would say is we both agree that you need to go granular, you need to understand the local market and a local type of property and the supply and demand. Secondly, we do recognize that government policy, and that includes obviously migration, plus the RBA and interest rates, and all of those things, and bank lending policies, are things that influence property prices quite dramatically. And we both agree, I think, that the industry is pretty bad at sharing information, disclosing good information, and frankly are doing all they can to make it very hard for people to actually make good decisions about property, which is one of the reasons why we do what we do, because we think it's really important to go granular, to look at the data and to really pull it apart, rather than just be swept away with these headline stories about prices are going to double, panic, panic, panic. Oh, and I thought this was quite fun. This is from Tarek, who actually was talking about property prices. You know, there's pricing here for two gas stations very close together with a 60 cents gap between the two. And that's a bit like the property market, right? So if you just look at the headlines, you know, you're going to actually be misled sometimes with what's really going on. You have to go granular. You have to really understand. You have to go into the detail. And I always say, Edwin, and that's worth reiterating, I think, you know, if you think about somebody buying a new refrigerator, they'll probably do quite a lot of work online and actually compare prices and go to comparison sites and maybe even, you know, look at a few different models before they actually decide. People do more work on those than they do when it comes to buying property. It seems to me that people get swept up with the emotions, we often say. They often over-rely, I think, on the agents in terms of the guidance that they actually give. And quite often, because of that, they end up with a lemon rather than something that actually makes a lot of sense. So what we are trying to do, and I think we're both aligned here, is that we actually believe more focus on due diligence, more focus on granular analysis on the way in is the secret to making really good property transactions. And I think neither of us are saying don't buy. What we're saying is make sure you buy the right property at the right point in time at the right price. And there's some principles that we can talk about to help guide that decision.
Yeah, look, I guess to further answer Joey's question there, I think we're looking at the data points, and this is what 2026 is going to be all about. It's going to be about real data, not the AI data, not manipulated data, which is the Doc Wilson's data, not when he was with their mate, and not and not that imaginary data as well. So my interpretation of the data that we collect as a business, because we are a business, is what I get from my colleagues on the ground, what I hear, the trends, Dusty's and Evan's, Melanie's and Linda's, searching and the way what they do on WeChat. Hence the reason why WeChat chatterers, because across both they speak Cantonese and Mandarin, so they get across the different investor platforms that are on WeChat that are locally based, as well as WeChat groups over in mainland China and in the other parts of the world. So, and then obviously we've got the data points from the legal fraternity, the migration lawyers, the migration agents, the information that we get from them, what they, because they've got the finger on the pulse with that, because obviously that's how they make the money as well, understanding and learning. And a lot of them are also of Asian persuasion, so somehow they seem to get a lot of information well ahead of everybody else. Then you look at we look at the trends, obviously the buying trends from our clients, what our colleagues. I've been in the industry almost 30 years. I was in sales and property management for 18 or just over 20 years before we moved over to the buyers advocacy or buyers agency side of things. So, in being involved in the industry for almost 30 years, I've built relationships, from your salespeople to managers to business owners to franchise owners and highly ranked managers. So I get a lot of information from what goes on the ground. So whereas your information is more interpretation of what's going to happen, potentially going to happen, is more concurrent with your surveys, which is more in line with the economic background of where people are positioned. So you're basing your decisions or they're your data points. I'm a little bit more. More when I talk and when I speak about this and put all my thoughts and that together, I'm talking about the shifts in the market, more from the impact, as I said earlier on, from the political influences, and there's a lot of obviously a lot of other information that we have, and we're privileged to that. A lot of other people aren't. I'm able to share it on our rants and to give people an insight of the movements, because of the connections that our extended groups have, with different departments. So if we look at the scenarios that you mainly bring up, Martin, which are if immigration was to stop altogether, well, then then we've got a ball game on our hands, right? But the question is will that change? When will it change? How will it change? How quickly can it change? And other policies with regards to the obstacles and the obstacles and the red tape, the green tape, and that's around construction, all the obstacles and hindrances that are before developers and builders to crank up a notch to get things moving along. So I think what we're doing is coming from different angles and giving our followers and our viewers data points, data sets that they can then make their own decisions, make their own conclusions. I put mine together. I mean, it's for fun, it's for chatter, it's for the show and a bit of entertainment, but also give people an idea where we are. I mean, again, it's not a crystal ball, but I'm basing a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm basing it on the information that we've gathered over the years, what's still happening, what we're seeing it's going to be hard for certain policies to change, and how quickly that can change, and even if the opposition were to have control of the helm in 2.5 years' time, is it really going to change, or is it going to be the same shit with a different face?
Yes, well, we've often said that the two major parties do seem to be much aligned with regard to this. Both sides of politics through the election campaigns at various times have said we want prices to continue to rise. And, of course, government policy recently has been to try and actually ensure that has happened. Now, if we actually talk then about different locales, I think we should probably start with Victoria, because it seems to me that Victoria is a bit of a canary in the coal mine, insofar that some of the policies in Victoria in recent years has led to what looks to me to be a risk of significant decline in and around Victoria. And, by looking there first, maybe that's a little bit sort of a baseline for what happens when things go wrong. Now, if you can sort of list out some of the things that they've done, they've actually made it harder for property investors. They've done quite a lot to try and actually build the high rise. There's supply of property, but actually not good quality property in a lot of areas. And there are a number of people looking perhaps to leave Victoria, particularly in and around Melbourne, simply because of what's been going on there and what is likely to go ahead. So What's your take on the Melbourne story?
Well, look, my take is that Melbourne's still got a long way to fall, a long way to bleed, and again because of the three areas: government policy, all the money that's being spent on feel good stunts, and and what I'm calling the Great Victorian Exodus, because of the social unrest, which is really driving it. People don't realise how much that's been driven. Now, just because the mainstream aren't talking about the Great Victorian Exodus just yet, because they don't get to talk to a lot of the people that we talk to. They don't get to talk to a lot of the property managers that we talk to. When we ask them, are you getting what's your feedback on on interstate travellers and that? And it's picking up. The conversation, the chatter is really increasing. I'm seeing, because I do a lot of driving, I know whether it's just me psychologically, but I'm seeing a lot more Victorian plates on the road than what I saw in the previous half of 2025, Martin. I could say over the last 2 weeks, I could count at least 10 Victorian number plates that I come across in my travels on a daily basis. Again, whether it's just me, but I think the great exodus, because of go back to government policy, land tax, that land tax, people don't realise that a lot of investors, a lot of investment institutions and super funds and independent investors, private investors, they're invested in up to their eyeballs in commercial and industrial land. And when the land taxes were hiked, I mean they're big parcels of land, and the tenants aren't copying the rise in those government hikes, because the tenants pick up the tab of the outgoings, but they're not copying it. So you've got this. You're going to have a huge amount of unemployment, and people are saying, well, when investors leave the markets, then that means that the first-time buyers can buy in, and we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that in Melbourne. The listings on market for sale across 2025 increased from 2024, and we hit the 30,000 mark earlier than we did in 2024. Over the spring selling season, and they're not taken up because you've got, obviously, if you can't get a loan, you can't buy, and if you're unemployed, you're not going to get a loan. One side of the equation. The other side is a lot of the homes that are for sale, a lot of these investment properties that are for sale, first-time buyers don't want to go there, or young families don't want to go there because of the social unrest, the social issues that these areas are facing. And we're talking about new subdivisions. We're talking about fringe Melbourne region subdivisions. Hence the reason why we've got 3 times as many freestanding homes for sale in Melbourne than what we do in Sydney, and also we've got 3 times as many freestanding homes for sale in Melbourne as they have apartments for sale. So they're my data points, my base data points. And then when you've got this exodus, this great exodus of you say the middle class families, so that they're going to be looking for other states for education. They're going to be looking for other states for security, job security, physical security, education security. And you could also say for religious reasons as well. So my call is that Melbourne's still got a nosebleed. The people have gone in a little bit prematurely. As I said, about 6 months ago, I started saying that I was starting getting a lot of a lot of information, a lot of people posting a lot of stuff online, pushing investors to go back in, and even the mainstream picked up a few articles how investors are back in Melbourne, this and that. But it's like a roller coaster ride. You sort of get the we haven't got to the real buzz yet. You sort of go up and down a couple of introductory hills, and you get a little bit of adrenaline, but the real rush hasn't really happened. And I think that's where we're going to see 2026. What could save Melbourne? What can save Melbourne? I'd say ironically, in my view, this is my own personal view, the only thing that could save Melbourne right now is another million silent tigers to come in and park themselves in Melbourne, which is immigration. That's the irony of it. But for that to happen, you've also got to then go back on the government policies around the restriction of gas and the restriction on many things that the Indian community like to use for cooking and for the general purposes. So you've got to walk back a lot of government policy, but that's the irony. I think immigration, external immigration, is the only thing that could really save Melbourne, because investors, whilst the ones that have got a couple of brain cells in their heads, more than a couple of brain cells in their heads, are really not going to be favouring to put anything in Melbourne. I would dare say, Martin, that you're better off buying a dog box in a high-rise building in Sydney than what you are buying in Melbourne under the current state that it's in.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it's fascinating to me also in my surveys. Some first-generation migrants, a lot of them have come into the Melbourne area. I think of Point Cook, for example, places around that area. A lot of them are actually already in financial distress because, of course, they've had to gear up quite significantly to be able to get a property, homeland packages or a relatively new property. And so one of the other things I'm seeing is, again, a lot of people who've come in with an enthusiasm to buy and then are finding that it's quite complicated and difficult to make the property work. And property prices, of course, aren't rising. And my scenarios for Melbourne, I'll just put this one up. This is Victoria. Even the best case scenario for the sort of the house best case scenario over 3 years, I think the best you could do is about 7%, 7.6%. But the most likely case, my base case, is a bit of a fall. And in fact, interestingly, I've got an 8% fall over 3 years as my base case at the moment, based on everything that I'm seeing. And that takes account of all the things we've been discussing. There is, of course, a worst case if we actually get a recession, if we get migration dialing right down, and if rates stay higher, then there's more risk to the downside too. So for people in the Melbourne environment, unless you are supremely optimistic about the economic context for Australia, you are going to be a bit cautious about going into the Melbourne market. Then when you look at the supply of property that's there is quite a lot on the market. But I also note that quite a lot of it is relatively low quality. Some of it's ex-investment properties that needs quite a lot of work. And there are also a lot of relatively new properties that have been poorly built and are costing quite a lot. And interestingly, some of the high-rise, of course, have had very significant strata fee rises since they were actually completed. And that's something a lot of people aren't actually factoring in when they do their modelling and thinking about what they can afford. So to my mind, if you want to sort of think of a spectrum of different locales, I think the Melbourne and Victoria story is probably at the sour end of the story. And I don't see anything changing politically, and as you say, unless they style the migration even higher, which is it's certainly feasible, possible, knowing what we know. But I guess if you wanted to sort of compare and contrast, let's think about WA at the other end of the story. I've got WA scenarios here. And in WA, my view is that the best case scenario over the next 3 years is another significant rise, let's say 15%. The base case is a small sort of fall, but really going flat. In the worst case, a bit of a fall, but it's nowhere near as significant as Victoria. But the point is, in WA, we've seen significant rises in prices, and that's continuing. But I am seeing more distress. So the number of postcodes in the West now where mortgage stress has started to rise significantly is up dramatically. We're seeing a lot of property investors seeing negative returns rather than positive returns because there's a limit to how much they can put the rents up in the West. So I have a feeling that 2026 could be the year that the West, Perth in particular, begins to move in a rather different direction. So to my mind, whilst you might put the Western Australian story sort of on the sort of the more enthusiastic end of property price moves, there are quite significant risks that I'm seeing.
Yeah, look, I thought for a minute there, I thought you were going to say that 2026 was going to be where WA finally secedes from the Commonwealth. I don't know what I was thinking that, man. But hey, look, with all these feel good policies that are being thrown around, and look, sorry folks, but we're going to be talking property, so I've got to sort of my political correctness filter is sort of on 50% at the moment, because property and what happens doesn't discriminate in terms of the values. When we're talking about some government policies, when you start thinking about land controls, when you start thinking about ownership, historical ownership of the land, and you start talking about those impediments, well, look, it could be a shock. The other shock that WA could have is, as I've said for almost 30 years, is WA and places like WA, the one-trick ponies. If China sneezes, the property prices there catch the flu. So it's a tricky situation. I don't do a lot in Melbourne. I haven't done anything in Melbourne for 20 years. In WA for 20 years, but you sort of nothing much has changed in terms of what could impact, and the impact of the government policies, international hiccups. I think WA is in a riskier position, and a lot of people sit under that. Also, and the other thing is they've had more. My understanding is that they've had more tradespeople leave as well. So I don't know. It's one of those tricky things. And so, from an investment point of view, if I had that choice, I think for me, it's. People have made the money. They've made the money, but moving forward, buying in now, in your Perth markets, buying in now, I think I would very risky if it goes down the trajectory of Victoria.
Yeah, and I think that's the really interesting point. Is Victoria the canary in the coal mine? Is it going to sort of spread out elsewhere, or are the high migration inputs into the West, which is still happening at the moment, going to be sufficient to prop it up? But if you look carefully, in my analysis, there are already some pain points in the West. And in fact, I've had a couple of conversations, one-on-one conversations recently with people who are actually looking at the West and getting quite twitchy about the price they're being asked to pay, which is pretty full, the expectation of little growth ahead, which is another factor to sort of take account of. And interestingly, I do notice that some of the banks are limiting the amount to which they are prepared to lend into the West because of the very significant price rises. So in some cases, people are unable to borrow as much as they think they might. I had an interesting question come in as well. You were talking from Danny, and he's talking about Canberra, which of course has some of the tenancy rules and rent caps and other things too. So thoughts on Canberra? Well, I'll show you my thoughts on Canberra based on my scenarios, and then we'll get Edwin's input here. The ACT, of course, is a one-trick pony. It's very much government, right? And so what happens in Canberra is going to be what happens to government. But here is the story. So I'm not seeing a huge amount of upside in Canberra, only 3% over 3 years in the best case scenario for houses. But there's more of a significant risk to the downside, around 12%. If this is my base case, that assumes that we get a slowing economy, that interest rates go higher from this point, and that unemployment rises a little. If unemployment rises a lot stronger, and particularly public sector employment, remember that public sector employment has been very strong in the last few years. We've got a greater proportion of the GDP being supported by government spending and government jobs. So if those were to wind back, then there is a significant downside risk in the Canberra market. So to my mind, the ACT is all about what happens with regard to the public sector there. But there isn't, I don't think, a huge amount of upside in the Canberra market. And, it's interesting when you look closely, again, there are pockets. I do see some of the areas. So this little comment here. Well, some areas of Canberra are a little bit, a little bit whiffy. It's not uniform. And that's the other point, that when I look in Canberra, you have to go granular even in Canberra itself, because, what's happening in some areas is not happening in other areas. I'm also seeing quite significant differences between units and houses. And I'm still seeing quite a lot of new stuff being built that's of very low quality. And I've had more conversations in the last month with other people there with strata fee problems. So the strata fees are going up. The defects in the buildings that they're actually in are rising. And that's causing a huge amount of difficulty. And one of the reasons why some property investors are now looking to quit is simply because of these ongoing strata fees. So I'm not convinced that the Canberra story is other than relatively negative over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, look, from an investment point of view, I spent a bit of time there a couple of months ago. Dusty and I spent a bit of time there, and we were looking around. And I was thinking to myself as we were driving around the different areas and looking at property, looking what was being built, looking at the old. Funny enough, in my mid-20s, I actually lived in Canberra for a year when I was in college. There, I rather enjoyed it. So it's if you like that lifestyle, it's nice. It's if you have that type of a mindset, it can be a ghost town. You have to have a certain appeal, an inclination to sort of want to live there. A lot has changed. The rental restrictions, a lot of the government policies have impacted a lot. But if you're a young family and you can work remotely and you just want to get it, like I would, that would be somewhere in some of I can't remember the suburbs, but I was just noticing you've still got the older small two bedroom or 3-bedroom cottages, and right next door, you would have knockdown rebuilds, and the population around some suburbs is very basically they had one foot in the nursing home type of population. so and sooner than later, there'll be a lot of those homes would be on the market. My sister lived there she lived there for about 18 years. When she was selling her home a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, she found it very, very difficult to sell. She, her and a partner, their expectations from when they put it on the market, actually probably only 12 months ago, from when they put it on the market to when it got sold, 4 or so months later, I think they, from their expectations to what they actually got was a difference of about 20%. And they got to a point where they had to sell because they had no choice, but they had to sell. And it was rather interesting. So when I went there, when Dusty and I were there a couple of months ago, as I said, I would say, from an investment point of view, I don't rate it. I don't know enough about it. I wouldn't know where to look. If you're going to park money, you would park it where there's a lot of these older cottages that are being knocked down, and you've got a lot of newer homes being built around it. That's where you would obviously, if you're going to land bank or park your money, if that's your style of investing. But if you're a first home buyer, you want something in a nice area that to sort of it suits the first home buyer. But the private sector, you would, again, Martin, like you said earlier on, you really have to be in the a government employee. Otherwise, everything else was really, it was more alive when I lived there than what I saw it when being there 2 months ago. It was dead as far as I was concerned. There was more activity happening when I lived there in my early 20s than what we saw a couple of months ago. So I'd say the private sector would struggle there. Again, not knowing a lot about it, but just my observation, it was just we're just there for a few days. I agree with saying we saw a lot of, medium density, 6 level, 4, 5, 6 level developments going up just about everywhere. But the quality that was what was being discussed amongst the group was the quality of the build wasn't that good. So you'd have to tread very, very carefully buying into those developments off the plane. They look swish, but everything looks good on a brochure, I say. Everything looks good on a brochure and on the renderings that they have at the front of the development site, looks wonderful. But it's had its problems. But so for a young family, if you work remotely, and you're not a government employee, and you work remotely, and you're in if I had that choice again, I'd go there if I was but as an owner occupier. But as an investor, not in my spectrum.
Well, that's very interesting, Edwin. If you look at the Cotality ANU data that came out very recently, if you look at Canberra here in the middle of the page, the value to income ratio in Canberra for houses is 7 relative to Sydney at 12.5. If you look at the years to save, it's 9.5 relative to 16 in Sydney. And if you look at the serviceability, it's actually better than quite a few other places too. So there are some reasons to think that the Canberra market, which hasn't grown up as much as some other markets, has a little bit more latitude. But I do think it is very much predicated on what happens with regards to the public sector. If the public sector jobs don't continue to rise and they start actually coming down, of course, there was a discussion about whether, in fact, there would be a 5% trim of budgets across departments. Didn't happen, but that was floated before my EFO. That could all change. But yeah, I've had some interesting conversations with prospective first-time buyers with some flexibility as to where they go. And for those, I have said, just like you've said, if you're a first-time buyer and you can find the right property in the Canberra market, you might have the opportunity to buy something of slightly higher quality at lower price, but don't expect possibly as much momentum from a price perspective ahead. But it does depend on a lot of other things. And, different locations, they're not all the same. You can go out into the outer suburbs of Canberra and you're almost in the bush. So, you need to be a little bit selective as to where you look and what you look for. And again, I want to underscore, I've got a lot of stories coming through with regard to this issue of strata fees. So if you're thinking of apartments, it's really, really important to do your due diligence on strata fees, and specifically think of that, plus, of course, the insurance questions. And in fact, Aussie Jen floated the question here, I think it's right, are we following the footsteps of Florida with excessive HMO or strata fees and building insurance? Yes, absolutely. Building insurance going through the roof and strata fees going through the roof are two factors that people have to take serious account of. And unfortunately, again, in my conversations, I quite often find that those are things that are not fully understood. Just before we come to New South Wales, we might just quickly talk about Queensland, because, of course, Queensland is a bubbly market. And in fact, in my scenarios, the Queensland story, and the best case scenario over 3 years is 14% rise, so almost as much as Western Australia, best case. The base case is flat or small fall. The worst case is a bit of a drop. But again, Queensland looks to be supported by quite high inward migration. Games, of course, which are coming through. And I guess also the fact that there are people looking to come out from other places to look at Queensland. The rental returns in Queensland, I would warn people, are beginning to get shaded. So we had a significant time where the rental returns in Queensland were a lot stronger than almost any other state, even than just WA. That's not quite the same now. The reason is that there's a limit on how much you can put the rents up relative to the property prices, and property prices have been rising fast. But it does seem to me that there's, the Brisbane market in particular is still a very hot market, Edwin.
Yeah, but and you only have to look at the numbers. You only have to look at the numbers on market when you compare it to a lot of other markets. And I mean, it's the thing that a lot of people need to be very careful, extra careful. And I know there's a lot of buyers agents that buy help people buy with AI information, or just using the internet and buying properties up there. I'd be super cautious buying up there. We would not be assisting anybody to buy there unless I personally inspected the property before we even made an offer on, because the construction, there's greater construction issues there than what you have here in Sydney, and you're paying some serious coin up there now for some of the well positioned homes. When you look at the strata complexes, when we went with one of our colleagues, we went up there to help him make a decision on some of the investments that he had up there, and looked at the state of the strata complexes and the way that the strata functions there. It's really bizarre, absolutely mind-boggling stuff, where common areas are just not covered by the owner's corporation. I mean, it was, and when you look at the complexes, and I think we spoke about them when after that trip, and I shared some of the photos on one of the Monday evening property reads. It was absolutely shocking, and this has made me realise that the state of the, and also driving around, looking at the different properties, the homes, they're not as built as sturdy as they are built down here, but and also they take a bigger battering than what we do, and so you got to be super careful in terms of pricing. Look, for me, it's apart from the numbers that we look at, and very little contact with people on the ground up there. If the numbers have been persistently low for the last 3 years, extremely low, there's not a lot of choice, and a lot of people are calling the drop is coming, this is that, and you've even got people with funny website names that have originated from Queensland, that were calling falls up there first and foremost, and now you don't hear about these funny websites with funny names, because the market there is so compressed. Like there's so much demand, interstate demand. All the infrastructure is going. That's the momentum that's picking up for the infrastructure that's going to be built for the games and everything else there. It's really sucking up a lot of the resources. There's too much red tape for builders there to really do something to move construction along. There's a lot of red tape. The costs are just phenomenal. Then you've got the state government sucking up a lot more resources, so you're not going to get a lot more residential being built than the very little that's being built currently, and that's being in the pipeline. And up there, it's the locals even got less of an appetite to live in high rise than what we have. So you've really got a market that could potentially continue to outperform a lot of the other cities because of the sheer numbers and the sheer demand that's there. Again, driven by government demand, driven by the the games and the absorbing everything, all the resources that could go into the construction of residential, because there's no money to be made there at the moment in terms of it's too much of a risk for the small developers. So they're just saying, hey, we'll stop developing. We'll just get a contract with the government and wait it out another year or two and see what happens. So numbers are very, very low. So but demand continues to increase.
I'll make the point that Brisbane is not the same as the west of Queensland. So I'm looking at problems in Toowoomba, Ipswich, and a few other areas too. So again, don't read Brisbane across the whole of the state. There's quite significant variations. Again, just before we get on to Sydney, we'll in a second. Just wanted to talk about South Australia, because South Australia is looking relatively hot. In fact, in my modelling, we're looking at a 17% rise over 3 years in the best case scenario for houses, and even on the base case, a small rise and a bit of a fall in the worst case scenario. South Australia, of course, is a relatively small market, centred in Adelaide. Again, outside of Adelaide, things are a bit different. But I'm still seeing quite a lot of interest in South Australia. I'm still seeing a lot of relative attractiveness of pricing compared with other states. And interestingly, in those earlier slides I showed with totality, if you look at South Australia, actually it's getting quite negative there in terms of time to save and time to buy and all those things too. So to me, South Australia is quite near to its peak as well. And so the question is, whilst it might be quite positive, I think it has high risks now. And again, I'm seeing quite a lot of evidence of poorly constructed property relatively recently. A lot of people piling in, a lot of property investors buying relatively bad properties and higher strata fees. So all of those things are bubbling below the surface. Then we've got anything to add on South Australia, but it's not. I know it's not a market that you necessarily will follow.
No, yeah. Look, I've got very little to say because I really don't have anything to do with South Australia at the moment, and
it's a small
got
market.
No interest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Look, the only time I was really interested in South Australia was when my father lived down there. That was about it. But and some friends have talked about it. Look, you've got to, it's a market that a lot of investors jumped in. And again, the thing that I would be saying is exactly what you just sort of alluded to as well. Change of government policy, change of regulations, tenancy regulations, and everything, and it's going to make have a greater impact. The locals there. So it comes back to government policy. And I haven't had anything a lot to do with it. Very little, if anything at all. Some friends have been interested in properties there, but I really haven't had much to do. But definitely, government policy is one of the key elements there to really keep an eye on, and because you're and as you said, you're going to have your ceilings, your rental ceilings, where the investors have to align themselves with the more traditional rental market than your budget accommodation, cash in hand, markets where people can still do that because they live locally. But in South Australia, I don't think you've got the. My understanding, my current understanding is that I don't think you've got the big WeChat chatter influence there, or your silent tigers that follow suit, to sort of squeeze more juice out of the a rental yield from those properties. So yeah, it's be cautious.
Absolutely. And just in terms of on others, Tasmania is relatively close to Melbourne, I think, in terms of trajectory ahead for all sorts of reasons. Northern Territory is a very small market, is very much sort of influenced by a lot of externalities, but because of the low volumes, it's moving the prices around quite a lot. And in fact, if you want information on those markets, check my scenarios. But let's go to New South Wales, Edwin. It's your home turf. And I'll predicate it by saying it's not really one market. It's lots of different markets. and it also depends on how you define the Sydney, Greater Sydney, and all of those things. But what's your take on the Sydney story?
Oh, Sydney's, to me, it's for 2026, again, based on the data points that we're looking at and have been looking at more in detail over the last couple of years, 24 and 25, and things are going to sort of continue to follow suit, because any changes, it takes a long time to turn that ship or reverse that ship that has already sailed. So my call is for 2026, Sydney, we'll have an increase of 7 to 10% again, and regardless of the fact that we've reached 1.76 million for the for homes, 1.2, 1.2, close to 1.3 across the board in terms of the medium. Now, and I'll say that even if we were to have a 50 basis point rise, the impact is going to be minimal because of the government policies, because of the other factors around because it's not just about interest rates, it's not just about money. There's a lot of money sitting on the sides. And the sheer fact that there's not a lot of numbers on market, as we saw, if you take away the land subdivisions, we're actually tracking on par, and we started tracking below 2024 figures towards the end of the year. When you take away the huge amount of land subdivisions, and we're going to have more of that next year, because nobody really wants to build, again, because of the restrictions around construction. So you've got no construction, you've got less supply, you've got more demand created by government policy, and you're going to have a lot more interstate migration. We're going to see the great exodus of the great Victorian exodus, where we're apart from South Australia, we're really prime for the small to medium enterprises, the small manufacturers, and because we don't have the fired land taxes that they have over there. So there's going to be a lot of shifting of from different markets over to New South Wales. So Sydney, we've also got we've had a lot of infrastructure, government infrastructure that's absorbed a lot of the trades, which has then crippled the residential development. There's a push for high rise, but people don't necessarily want high rise, and the numbers that you've got to pay for the uncertainty now in these new developments are almost 50% higher than what you can buy a block of units that at least the issues with it, or whether it was built 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. At least you're walking in with eyes wide open, hopefully, and at least what you're in for, rather than putting your money paying 30, 40, 50% more off the plan for something new. And that's the differences that you have. So that is why I say that the apartment market, even the high rise, we are going to see a bit of a nudge upwards in that area, man. Because what are the choices for first home buyers? Under $1 million, there's hardly anything around unless you really want to go to the fringes of the Sydney region and beyond. So freestanding homes in some areas, we're going to see, as I said earlier on in the rant, I really truly believe that we're going to see a rise of 20, even 25% in some areas for freestanding homes, because you look at what the government policy did in the shift to the first to homes around your Kings Park and how much that pushed Kings Langley. So we went within a 3-month period, we went being able to buy a home, freestanding home in Kings Park for $1 million to $1.05 million. Within 3 months, you can't touch anything there for 1.3, for less than 1.3, which is crazy stuff, right? We saw the prices shift overnight, week by week, and that pushed the prices from your Kings Langley, your Quakers Hills, your surrounding suburbs around in the Blacktown LGA. Likewise down in Campbelltown, and in other LGAs where you could buy around the $1 million, and then the government policy what it did, but that's still playing out, and it will continue to play out for the first half of the year. So we're going to see markets that are going to continue to be shifted upwards, because people are now not considering. It wasn't that long ago when the first home buyers target was 750 to 850. That was the first home buyer band, the price band. Then we went from that to your 1.1. From your 1.1, now we're at your 1.5. And now for first-time buyers to be talking about mortgaging themselves at your 1.5 it's not unheard of. So, and they're pushing prices up. So in terms of some Sydney, across the board, 7 to 10%. Some areas, some pockets of Sydney, we're already identifying the potential growth of 20 to 25%. Your freestanding homes, your older established apartment complexes, they're going to be running. They're going to be running hot as well in 2026 because of. You've got a less outgoings than what you do in your high rise. The WeChat chatter is what they're basically saying. Also, is that you got to get in. If you're going to get into Sydney, you get in either as a first-time buyer or as a rent investor. You got to get in, because we're not going to have another opportunity. We're not going to have another opportunity for at least another 5 or 7 years, although people aren't going to have another opportunity for at least 5 or 7 years. Because even if all the program stuff that the government keeps on talking about, even if they started building those tomorrow, it's going to be 5 years before people get the keys, right? So when you've got the current policies, migration policies in the interstate migration coming in, well, it's a supply and demand, basic economics of supply and demand. The supply is just not there for the sheer demand that's been created politically and also from an interstate point of view. So that's look, and I say that, as I said earlier on, even we've got a 25% basis point rise, the impact is not going to be felt that much. And I guess the other person that we've got to blame, or a lot of people have got to blame for the rise in 2026 is Uppercut Adams. Now, if you recall, Uppercut Adams, I hope he's listening to the show, because then a lot of people are going to have a lot of beef with John Adams, and you can send him this section of our rant, because he got a lot of people into silver, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and and that's from where we were then to where we are now, that silver's pretty much tripled in value. So guess where that silver those silver gains are going to go into, Martin? We've got the phenomenon of the desperate housewives are going to say, hey, listen, I put up with your crypto stuff. Now the silver, it's time, buddy. Put up or shut up. So So people can only blame Uppercut Adams because he's the one that was pushing silver from 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, well,
They've
it's
made a lot of money.
a very good point. And this idea of people saying, well, at a point in time, I want to buy a property, and you've made some money on the cryptos or lost money on the crypto, depending on when you bought and sold, but now on precious metals. And so there's another catalyst there. Plus, of course, a lot of people who are coming into the country, the migrants are coming into the country, a lot of them are cashed up. This is the thing that I think people haven't fully understood. There are a lot of people coming back to Australia and migrants coming into Australia, and they're bringing a lot of money with them.
Yeah, and this is why, and this is one of the reasons why. Apart from one of the reasons why, okay, was joining I spoke to Charles Tarby about setting up the Century 21 Buyers Advocacy Buyers Agency to the Century 21 brand, was because I felt there was a lot of expats and new PR holders and people with middle class and up that have got job postings like in your medical fraternity from England and other parts of the Commonwealth coming into Australia, and a lot of expats coming back into Australia. So and Century 21 obviously is in almost 86 countries around the world now. So, and that hence the reason why I aligned myself and the rest of my team, we made a decision to align ourselves with the Century 21 brand for that reason, because the more you and I spoke about over the last couple of years as to what was happening with property and the more the inquiry that we were getting from all our marketing campaigns over different platforms and different means, we're getting a lot of servicing, a lot of helping to buy a lot of people from all over the world, predominantly expats. Coming back into Australia, buying me in Sydney. So yeah, there's a lot of money. Now, the other thing that I'd say that the high end market is going to have a rebound, because that's money that's people have been waiting again. We're waiting on the sidelines to see what happens. But over the last month or so, working with some of my colleagues that work with people of influence over in Indonesia, Singapore, parts of Hong Kong, they're all of a sudden people are making a lot more inquiry into your high end markets here. But these are people that that have got PR, so they're allowed to buy secondary property, and they feel with uncertainty. Should something happen in the Asia Pacific region, God forbid, and we end up with a hot war around there, well, guess what? People are going to be shifting a lot of their money into the Australian shores, and these aren't people. Investors can only buy new properties, of course, we know that, but you've got a lot of people that are holding dual citizenship that function and reside predominantly over in other parts of the Asian Pacific region, and they're the ones that are sort of looking more and making more inquiry from the information that we get into the high end market. So yeah, we could see a rebound in that. But also, as I said, because of the growth, the capital gains that people have had in other asset classes, and they're finding it, and they're feeling it's time to come in, because there's not, when you compare our homes on market, we average just over 8,000 across 2025. I mean, that's pittance. That's pittance in comparison to any international city around the world.
Absolutely. And it's just worth sort of thinking about the relativities, right, of those different markets. And the number of transactions we see in Australia each year is relatively contained. Now, just on scenarios for New South Wales, this is my take. So on the best case scenario, I'm looking at about 8 to 9% over 3 years. On the base case, a little bit of a fall. And on the worst case, a more significant fall. But that's an average. And as Edwin said, some areas doing very differently to that. So that's why the granularity is important. And that takes us very interestingly, Edwin, into the other side of the conversation, which is about the industry. And in fact, Jenny sent a message and a question in beforehand saying, it seems to me, she said, that it's harder and harder to get good information as an ordinary punter when I'm trying to buy a property, because the property portals seem to be actually providing less and less information. It seems to be more restricted. And so her question was, in the light of that, what is the power of the portals? And what does that mean for the real estate industry over the next 12 to 18 months?
I think the portals have opened themselves up for a bit of disruption because of the shenanigans that are going on. Being involved more with a franchise group now and seeing a little bit more, having a little bit more insight into the goings-ins, ins and outs of the portals. I mean, I've had my personal opinions on what could be done and what's happened over the decades that I've been involved in the real estate industry. Transparency is going to diminish more. It's going to get worse. Strangely enough, the industry can pay for a service. If you're involved in the industry, you can pay for a subscription, and you can actually find out the sale value of a property within 48 hours. But I've always said that the portals have had that power and have had that data available that could release immediately, albeit it's not. Albeit it's not registered on the in the Values General's office, till 42 days after exchange of contracts, or a couple of weeks after settlement as well. So, but there was a way to get to that because of the way that agents have to punch in the numbers in order to list property and to take list property off the portals when they get sold. But unfortunately, that is not going to be made. It's not going to be made readily available. The industry itself, as we've seen over the last 18 months, has made it harder and harder for price discovery, and to get more up-to-date information. A lot of it lags. Louis Christopher does a great job at trying to get as much information out as early as possible, but even his hands are tied. So and I'm sure they paid a shitload of money for the data that they get as well. So, but the industry is going to go through some major changes, Martin. The industry, in my opinion, in 2026 is going to go through some major changes, and this is one of my biggest calls for 2026 is that by the end of 2026, we are going to potentially have 30 to 40% less offices than what you see right now across New South Wales, mainly in the east coast of New South Wales, potentially across Australia as well. And because of the compliance, the new compliance regulations that are coming in with regards to AML, the anti-money laundering legislation. That's one of them. Cybersecurity, the issues around cybersecurity, and as we've talked on the show for a while, how officers have outsourced a lot of data, a lot of information to third party service providers in order to provide a service that would otherwise be handled by an in-house property manager or a property officer in order to save costs. But that's going to be costly. That's going to bite many in the ass because of the cybersecurity regulations as well the penalties under the cybersecurity regulations, they're horrendous. So then you've got, added to that, to those costs, because they will, the officers are going to be incurring costs. Added to that is your insurance policies. Your insurance covers are going to go through the roof. Many officers, they're potentially double. And if you get caught under any one of those two scenarios that I mentioned earlier on, if you have issues under the AML or the cybersecurity, then obviously your insurance is just going to continue to go through the roof. Commercial rents haven't really tapered down for where a lot of the offices are located in. So my ears on the ground tell me that the information that I've obtained over the last 4 or 5 months, if anything, rents that are being that officers are paying, because it's hard to move offices. Once you establish in an area, it's you're a real estate office. It becomes a good tenant because you don't want to move. You lose potentially you could you lose the that marketing aspect of it. You lose your presence. You can lose business and so forth. So a lot of offices have to absorbing a lot of rental hikes. Franchise fees aren't getting any cheaper unless you can negotiate down. But it's all these services add up. Expanding overheads with regards to HR. At the human resource area, that's getting becoming more and more costlier, more pressures, more people wanting to take stress leave, maternity leave, every other sort of leave. I hurt my pinky on the when I was in a property inspection leave. All this sort of stuff, and more importantly, as you and I pointed out in the last quarter of 2025. Which the mainstream really haven't picked up on yet as much as what we have, and that is the sheer volume of sales have continued to drop, and hence the reason why we've got less sale by auction, less properties on the market to be sold under the auction because of the sentiment, the people not comfortable, and at the end of the day, your downsizers, your people that want to trade up, trade down, empty nesters, whatever you want to call it, whichever you want to go, they've got no choice to go to anywhere else because the listings are so poor. So, which means that offices in general terms aren't transacting. So they're not making the bread and butter. So when you think about it, 15 years ago, you would say that we were about, in general terms, 40% of the revenue that a real estate office made was made by the property management side of things. So if you have a rent roll, that brought in 40% of your revenue. The rest of your revenue to pay your overheads, pay your staff, pay your outgoing, everything else was made by sales. Currently, we would have around 20 to 25% best case scenario of the rent roll revenue covering the overheads of offices across the board. If you got a rent roll, which is a huge drop. Why? Because fees have gone on average from 15 years ago of about 6.2% plus GST to now sitting just around the 4%. So it's a huge drop, right, in terms of incomes, but now you're dependent on 75 to 80% of your livable revenue, your stay in business revenue to come in from sales, and what we've had is a reduction in sales over the last 3 years consistently. In 2026, I think we're going to have less sales than what we had in 2025. So the incomes aren't there. So we're going to have a lot of mergers, and But I think the majority of my call of 30% is losses of offices is going to be pretty much closures. More of it's going to be more on closures. People have had enough. People are tired. They're just going to retire early, sell up, get out. And realistically, Martin, over the last 2 years, I've seen a lot of my colleagues in the industry, pulling down to make to keep the doors open, starting to pull down from where we were in 2019, pulling down from the mortgages, pulling down from other assets to stay afloat. So and that's an issue. So that's where we are with the industry.
Yes, and it's interesting in my surveys, I survey small businesses too. I am seeing a lot of pressure in the real estate industry itself, cash flow pressure, and that means they're paying their bills more slowly. Interestingly, their confidence levels are also falling as well. So I can confirm from an industry view, I'm seeing that too. And whilst they're trying to cut costs and outsource as where they can, et cetera, let's face it, if you're not selling enough, everything else then sort of falls apart, and the sales volumes are relatively low. I think also it's true to say, Edwin, that we both believe that the volumes at auction will continue to fall over the next little while, and the listings themselves will be relatively low as well. So this is going to be a relatively contained market. The quality of properties available will be a bit suspect because, of course, there will be still some lemons popping up, but the quality of property perhaps is also going to be a bit suspect, but the transaction volumes will be quite a lot lower. And that basically means that there's a problem. Plus, of course, we've got the APRA intervention. So effectively on the investment side, they've actually imposed some additional requirements on the banks from next year with regard to investment lending. And I also have got some very interesting intelligence from some of the banks who are pulling back on lending at high LVR levels in certain postcodes because of the risks ratings that they now are actually seeing. So all of that says less property coming on the market, less property lending, and that means that in some cases prices still have capacity to go higher, but the industry itself, I think, is going to get crunched in 2026. And as Tony Locantro, I think, hey Tony, nice to see you in the chat there, said it's going to be like the stockbrokers leaving the industry post the GFC, right? The industry construction or deconstruction is happening. And I'm not sure that just the big portals are going to actually be the ultimate winners here for the reasons we've discussed. But I will say that from the point of view of an end punter trying to get information, it's harder and harder and harder to get good, non-filtered information about a particular property or a particular area, which makes it very much more complex to try and actually assemble a picture of what's going on in a particular location. And that's going to be, I think, a critical other takeaway that I'm seeing for this coming year.
And this is why for the last 3-4 weeks, I've been getting together with some high-level IT experts, and we've been throwing some stuff around with regards to putting something together to make make data a little bit more transparent. And don't know which way it's going to go. Obviously, it's an exercise that's as I said earlier on, that because of because you've got to pay big bucks from the main portals. So you've got to have an account with the main portal. I mean, we're talking about subscriptions of $1,200 a month.
Yep.
to get data as a real estate office. Obviously, from a sales point of view, that becomes critical as well, because then sales agents can know what the opposition sold homes for as well, because they need that information as well. But they're not passing that on freely to the general public, because it's costing them a fair whack, and that's just to start. So we're trying to look at ways that we could we can put this together and put an offer in. Perhaps talking a little bit more in for later on in the month, as we put some ideas together, I'll share those with yourself in private, Martin, and we could incorporate those into the one-on-one scenarios that you do as an added service. Because my thing is if we can share the cost of, if all I'm interested in, what I am interested in, like yourself, and hence the reason why we do why we do what we do, is what I'm interested in is if we can. We've got the resources. We've got the, I know where to get the information. We know how to put it together. We just got to. It's the cost of then pushing it out to the general public, to our followers and viewers. And if we can put a small price on it, so we can pay to maintain this, I think it's going to be valuable information for our followers and viewers. But hey, it comes at a price. And that's what I'm looking at the moment. We're just negotiating on obviously the getting these IT geniuses. They're not cheap. I can only persuade them so much with fresh eggs from my chickens, but that only goes so far. And then a good deed, that only goes so far.
Absolutely. Well, as we come towards the end of the show, there was one little thematic which popped up through the course of the conversation, and actually Smooth started the conversation off with talking about jobs, and types of loans, and can you find a way to get a loan? So there's a little bit of that going on at the moment. There's also the question of the unemployment. So as Leighton posed, what would happen if unemployment started to rise? When does it break the back? And we said that a couple of interest rate rises isn't going to rock the boat in Sydney that much. Higher unemployment absolutely could, I think. And interestingly, Leighton also then posed the question, well, what about cash buyers? Are there more cash buyers? There are more cash buyers at the moment because some people are sitting on quite a lot of equity from recent properties. So the cash buyer question and availability of credit doesn't seem to me to be the critical question. But I do think the unemployment question is worth thinking about. If unemployment were to start to rise significantly, now the RBA would then probably cut interest rates. But we are in a situation where the market has been somewhat protected because unemployment has been so low. And that means that people can actually, continue to paddle. They're paddling pretty hard at the moment, in some cases upstream, to continue to make those repayments, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some economic variances there that could actually maybe rock the boat a bit. But I sense from what you're saying, Edwin, that your sense is, despite those potential headwinds, overall, in Sydney, in some areas, the property market's still looking pretty bullish.
Well, for me, that's our position, because there's no chatter, there's no information, there's no data points that we've gathered and we have so far, and we'll get more obviously when the legal eagles come back to their offices in a couple of weeks' time. We'll start getting new information that would tell us that there's going to be a tapering down of immigration, and all we need outside of that, look, that's just one of our many points that we got to rely on. It's there. But look, Martin, the other thing is the WeChat chatterers are there's a lot of chatter going on. You may hear a bit more later on in the month of January. There are a couple of ideas floating around why China's buying silver so much silver, apart from monopolizing the solar panel in EV markets and all these the battery that they require, all the batteries and everything. So apart from that is on top of that, there's further chatter as to the mainland calling for people to register that are eligible for conscription. So you start reading between the lines, and you start to think, if there's a spark in in the Asia Pacific region, you've got to ask yourself, where are people going to run to? Where, and if that information starts to sort of filter out into the mainstream, people, as we've said for many years, and I've said for many decades, the majority of the people buy property on emotion, and they sell property on emotion. Or they rely more on emotion to buy, and they rely more on emotion to sell rather than logic. That's just the nature. That's just the nature of this beast. So when you've got those, when you end up with those sort of headlines coming in, you got to ask yourself, what are they going to do? What are people going to do? What are people going to do that have got assets, money in those regions where they feel unsafe? That's why I can sit in a way bullish with my calls.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important question, and it's one we should leave hanging because we don't know the answer yet, but we'll be watching over the next few weeks and months. Of course, Edwin, you're on every Monday evening through the year for the evening property rant, so we can pull that apart then. But I want to say thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts and your analysis with us today. It's been very interesting. And I would confirm, I think that we are actually quite aligned in terms of what we're seeing in terms of property dynamics. Some minor variations possibly, but, the messages always are important to go granular, important not to be swept away by emotion. And very importantly, when you actually if you decide to buy, make sure that you go through the due diligence processes rather than actually just being swept up with the emotion. And of course, being swept up with the BS that we get from the industry, particularly if you actually are seen as somebody who's likely to buy. I want to just put this up, though, Edwin, as a sort of a closing thought. This was coming a little while ago. He said, I've given up. Couldn't afford it in 2014 because I was single. I needed two people. Definitely can't afford it now. It's a scam. And I guess that is the sense they get from some people. This whole property thing is a scam. What I would say, though, is it's not actually necessarily a one-way street. There are people who've done really well in property. There are people who've actually made good property decisions. Unfortunately, though, there are many, many people who've made really, really bad property decisions. And so what we're trying to do here on this show and on the rant is to provide more information to help people make informed decisions about property. And, I guess that's what we're on about here. So we don't see property necessarily as a scam. We don't see necessarily property as the greatest thing since sliced bread every time. It depends on your decision-making process. It depends on the tools that you use as part of that process. And very importantly, it depends on whether you can actually contain the emotional aspect and not get carried away. And I think those are the sort of some closing thoughts from me. Any closing thoughts from you, Edwin?
Yeah, if you see Uppercut Adams walking down the streets of Wollongong, kick him in the shins. So...
Yes, indeed. Well, silver is a whole new story. Edwin, thank you.
If people want to reach out, so if people do want to reach out, please give them my link to my Twitter X account, and also I'm back on LinkedIn now, and I try to be informative and put out information there. Follow me, that way you get a better understanding. People will need help, sing out, reach out, because we do love to look after the followers and viewers of the Monday evening rants. And tell us that you are a follower and a viewer, and the office will give you the discount.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And Jason, thank you very much. Super Chat. Really appreciated your support through this year and tonight as well. Thank you very much for that. And it really does make a significant help to keep these shows going. Edwin, thank you very much for spending some of the time between Christmas and New Year with us. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good new year. And to everybody out there, we wish you the very, very best for 2026. We hope you manage to keep the wolf from the door. We hope that the property market is kind to you. And also stay tuned. We've got a lot more content coming over the next little while. So Edwin, thank you very much. I'm going to take you off stream, and we'll see you next Monday for the next round.
All the very best.
See ya. Hope you found that interesting and informative. As always, Edwin will be back next Monday, as I said. Next week, we'll have Damien Klassen back, and we're going to look at the markets as we come up to the start of the new year and ask some hard questions about where the markets may be going. The dogs are still here. Yep, there we go. Ready for their next exercise, I guess now. Having a bit of a lick there at the moment is Luna. So I'm not sure what she's licking, but looks pretty good to me. Anyway, thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. Take care. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you in 2026. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics signing off. Take care.